The book of prophet Micah. Lived a small town, a son of Judah, of Isaiah, the southern king of Israel. Long ago, divided in the covenant of Israel. Michael is warned the bad empire of Assyria, the takeout, and the comradage in Babylon, a greater, and all the prophets. They spoke of God's behalf and accused of Israel. In chapter 3, I am filled with strength, the Spirit of God and His justice and His power to declare how Israel has rebelled. And the story of this book, accusation and warnings, God's Israel. Will God a message of hope and restoration of God bring other side of God's judgment, and dive in the book you will see. In the first two sections, you develop Micah's actions and his warnings, and his leaders. A prophetic God peering all over Israel, like the Mount Sinai, with fire and smoke. And after he make a covenant, he's come to bring judgment to Israel for 500 years. Micah names all of his towns and his cities, all the culprits of his rebellion. For God's coming for them, but why? Micah picks a fight with the leaders. They become wealthy through the filth and greed. And the story of Ahab, the guy of taking Venred and Nabat, one of first kings, and the prophets. A promise of God's protection, whoever for to pay them. But no, Micah says, God has withdrawn his protections from his people. And second, accusations, how Israel leaders have together has been grave injustice, run the land by rivalry, and favor the wealthy, and the poor favor the land and the security of the land. And all this violation of the law of the Torah. Illegal to sell land that belongs to family, even to the poor. God's judgment, or God's form, oppression nation, or take of the northern nation, and the temple, and be reduced to rebel. This is very separate warnings, and not the final words of each of these warnings. It's concluded a promise of hope, and a poem of God and His shepherds rescue and He gather His flock, and rely on His people, and bring them back to good pasture, and be the king one once more. The second warning is concluded by picking up this image, a ruin during the temple, but it's not permanent. That's why God exalts His new temple. It's filled with God's presence, and fill the city with remnant and restored. And God's purpose to make Israel a new place of heaven and earth, which all the nations shall stream to Jerusalem, where God becomes the King of all nations, and peace on the earth. These two concluding poems are very powerful. In such in the book, a beautiful design series of poems about the future hope of Israel and all nations. After the Syria will be conquered and exiled to Babylon, and from there, God will restore His people and win them back to people. And then we in the New Jerusalem, a new Messianic king, a line of David, will be Lord in Bethlehem, will rule in Jerusalem, and restore people in God. And this Messianic kingdom of God, among the other nations, will be a blessing to all nations. At the same time, God will bring His final justice for all the evils of this world. The final section of this book is pattern, the warning of hope, as we first saw. Michael exposes himself of Israel's injustice and practice of leaders of destroying the land on his people. And Michael offers his favor his people and why to follow his God. He has told you of human what is good, and Lord requires of you to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with you in God. This is exactly what Israel is not doing. So they will come to ruins. And the book ends, another powerful. Israel personified as suffering, defeated individually, as a clear image of Israel's destruction. And as individuals watching for God's mercy and begs God to listen and forgive. But why? Why should I should forgive unrebellious of this people? The poet offers two reasons. A God's character. Who is God like you, who forgives sin and pardons rebellion? And know God's mercy is more powerful than God's anger. And a second, God's promises. You will stay true to God, Jacob, and show covenant love to Abraham as you swore long ago. The final words. It's allusion to God. God's promise to Abraham and his family, all the way back to Genesis. All nations will find blessing through the Abraham. To become a blessing to all the nations, we must first become faithful. And this explains the back and forth, a judgment and a hope. And God's gonna bless all nations through Israel. God must confront God among his people. And this leads to hope. God's covenant loves and promise are more powerful than human evil. And his whole biggest purpose is to save and redeem. Declining the book puts the lights, the covenant love, so he will again show compassion. He will trample our evil. He will toss our sin to the depths of the sea. And that's what the book of Micah is all about.